Welcome. My name is Peter Strong and I'm a professional psychotherapist and I specialize in mindfulness therapy for helping people overcome anxiety and depression and obsessive thinking, and also for work with addictions and many other common psychological and emotional problems that we all encounter. So one of the questions I'm often asked is, how can I overcome chronic worrying? People tell me that they are absolutely overcome with negative and reactive thoughts that seem to be endless, that arise throughout the day in a continuous stream, and that cause a great deal of anxiety and suffering. Reactive thoughts in general are one of the main things that we need to learn how to manage if we want to maintain good mental well-being and mental health. So one of the first things to understand is that worrying is not the same as caring for something or someone. This is a false equivalence that is commonly perpetuated, that if you really care for something or someone, then you are going to be worrying. I'm often told by mothers that it's their nature to worry about their children. I would say that needs to be reframed considerably. You want to care for your children. That is different than worrying about them. Caring is actually about really addressing the needs of that person or that child or the situation that you are focusing on. That's caring. Worrying is actually taking your energy away from caring. If you become lost in a sea of worry thoughts, then what happens is that you start to lose perspective. Your perception begins to narrow. You contract emotionally and psychologically, and that makes you less available to care for whatever you're focusing on. So that's an important distinction to make. Our goal in mindfulness training and mindfulness therapy is to learn how to be more present so that you can respond with greater compassion and that you can see things clearer, and that you can respond in a more skillful way to the demands of each and every moment that arises, including the challenges, the difficult parts of life. We want to be present fully with great clarity. Now, worrying and other forms of reactivity simply cloud that clarity. It takes us away from being able to respond to our maximum potential, to the needs of each situation. So learning to work with reactive thoughts in general is very worthwhile. And of course, the benefits are that it will release a great deal of energy that otherwise goes into worrying or stress, and it will result in you being able to be more effective in life. So how do we go about overcoming chronic worrying? Well, the second really important principle of mindfulness teaching in general here is you must not, under any circumstances, try to escape your worrying. If you try to simply take your mind off the worrying and distract yourself with some other kind of activity or thoughts, that action will simply reinforce the underlying anxiety that's fueling that worry. The best and well-tested and true method for overcoming chronic worrying and chronic habitual reactive thinking and intrusive thinking in general is where you actually turn towards the worry thoughts, but you change your relationship to those thoughts from being identified with them, becoming lost in them, to a relationship based on conscious, objective awareness, where you become the observer, seeing the thoughts. That is very different than becoming lost in that river of thoughts. That's the real problem with chronic worrying. We lose our perspective as the observer. We become overwhelmed by the thoughts. We fall into that river. So the way we do this is by learning how to meditate on those thoughts. Now, this may surprise you. Many people think that meditation is about trying to get out of the mind, get away from thoughts. And that might be a very pleasant activity, like taking a vacation. It's very nice to try and get away from worry thoughts. But unfortunately, they will come right back. Just like taking a vacation doesn't really heal the underlying problems. They will be waiting for you when you return from your vacation. So taking a vacation from the mind, although it's pleasant and can provide a temporary relief, is not the solution that we're interested in here. We're interested in fundamentally changing the underlying habitual, unconscious, reactive process that feeds worrying. So we do that by developing a conscious relationship with our thoughts, but transforming those thoughts into objects that we can see clearly, and we train with those thoughts. We learn to see them more and more as the observer and overcome that habit of reactive identification with them. We learn to develop balance in relationship to our thoughts. A simple analogy here is learning to cultivate balance on the bank of a river. If you have good balance, then you are not going to fall into that river. But if you have poor balance, then the slightest upset and you'll trip over and fall into the river and suffer. It's very much like that with thoughts. The thoughts themselves are not actually the problem. The problem is this reactive identification with those thoughts. That's the problem. So by training with the thoughts, by deliberately bringing in those worry thoughts, and then training to not fall into the sort of unconscious stream of reactive thoughts, then we are able to train out of that habit of reactive identification. Another very common method that we explore, and I will teach you during therapy sessions, is about changing the imagery of how you see these thoughts. So the biggest problem is that we do not see the thoughts clearly as objects. So we can imagine seeing those thoughts and make them into objects. For example, imagining the thoughts being the size of a grain of sand, making them very small will reduce their power considerably. You can then move those thoughts to create more space, and the more space you have, the less power those thoughts will have. So a very common technique which you can try for yourself is to greet the thoughts that you're meditating on and then move them and place them on the ground. So you're not trying to get rid of the thoughts. What you're trying to do is change your relationship to the thoughts. And that way you will be training in how to free yourself from the anxiety which is produced by becoming identified with those thoughts. So this simple technique works really well for thoughts in general, reactive thoughts. We learn to see them as objects that overcomes the habitual reactive nature of those thoughts, and then we learn to move the thoughts to a lower level, put them on the ground, make them smaller. That action will greatly reduce the intensity of the thoughts. And if you train in this way, then after a few days or weeks, the thoughts begin to learn how to resolve themselves. You set up a new pathway in the brain where those thoughts are processed in this way. They move to a different position, they become smaller, and they lose their emotional charge. So they're learning to resolve themselves. So if you'd like to learn more about the mindfulness approach to working with chronic worry and stress and anxiety and rumination in the case of depression, and intrusive thoughts and images in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder, then please contact me. Go to my website, learn more about the mindfulness therapy approach, and simply email me. Ask any questions you have about this approach and how to get started with mindfulness therapy. When you feel ready, we can schedule a session, and you will start to see major changes even after the very first session, because we do not waste time just talking about our feelings and emotions. Rather, we work on changing the relationship to our mind, to our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings. That's the crucial difference with mindfulness therapy. It's not the same as counseling or talk therapy. It's about working with the actual structure, the process itself that creates anxiety and depression. So if you'd like to get started with me, please contact me. Thank you.